I'm here with the great Nate Silver. You probably are seeing his name almost every day. He is probably one of the most renowned, if not the most renowned. I don't want to say you're a pollster because you're a lot more than that, but we'll just simplify it that way. He is the founder of 538. He's now his Substack blog, Silver Bulletin, is a must read. He's also joined the prediction markup startup Polymarket as an advisor. He's a former bestseller, and he's got a new book that is definitely a best-selling book. On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything. We're going to talk about that. That's really fascinating with the whole premise of the book. And we're going to talk about the Riverians and all that. But first, let's get an update. Before the debate, you had, and this is not good news for me, you had Trump at almost a 2-1 favorite to win the election.
Well, closer to 3-2. We had Trump.
Did you have him like 64 or something, 64 to 35?
At peak, and it bounced back a little bit toward Harris based on some stronger state polling toward before this debate. But yeah, look, there are some things to remember here if you're a Democrat. One is that the Electoral College is a pretty big disadvantage for Democrats. We saw what happened in 2016. We saw what happened in 2000. And this year, our math says that Harris has to win the popular vote by around 2.5 points to be the favorite in the Electoral College. So you have a real kind of, it's like in the NFL, giving the team a field goal. Sure. It's a pretty big headwind to fight against. And remember, I think, when she entered the race, the fundamentals looked pretty strong for Trump. He had to survive this assassination attempt, and people are grumpy about the economy. You have a very unpopular incumbent president, although he's become less unpopular since he decided not to run for a second term. So I think she's been a good candidate. I think she gave a good convention speech. I think she was effective in the debate this week. But it's not easy to take over midstream and have this Electoral College disadvantage, to have voter concerns about the economy. She's running a good campaign under, I think, fairly challenging circumstances.
Yeah, we're going to talk about your thoughts post-debate on how the number is going to change. You think one of the big mistakes you make was, and I agree with this, was not picking Josh Shapiro. Talk about that.
Yeah, look, I'm a math guy. In our model, about a third of the time, Pennsylvania winds up being the decisive state, what we call the tipping point state. So not that Shapiro would guarantee those electoral votes, but he's very popular in Pennsylvania, has about a plus 15 approval rating, won by a large margin in 2022, and has shown the ability. Pennsylvania has a little bit of everything, right? It's less one state and more like 4 states put together, where you have the suburbs and the rural areas that can get quite southern almost. You have a huge city in Philadelphia. And so to have that ability to build a diverse coalition, I think that would have been the percentage play for sure.
I want take us through a little inside the making of this sausage. In other words, if you were going to kind of simplify, okay, here's what I do. Here's how I get to where I get to. Here's kind of the essence of what I do.
Basically, we're taking a really robust average of polls, which sounds simple, but is more complicated than it might sound like. You have to think about things like, how are the outcomes related in different states? So, for example, 2016, Trump overperformed his polls in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those are all pretty similar states. I grew up in Michigan. If one state goes one direction, you probably have the other states follow. There are questions about how recent to wait polls. We have like new post-debate polls that'll come out this week. There's a couple out already. Should you totally throw out the old numbers or what? And the context of like when a poll's released. One reason our model had gotten a little bit more bearish on Harris is because she did not get much of a bounce after her convention.
No, she got the bounce. It was before. It was the kind of excitement of her, and she got that big bounce, and then it was there, and it was kind of, so that's, a lot of people felt it was a little bit of a sugar high.
Yeah, and that's been borne out. Like the New York Times Siena College poll, which is one of the highest rated pollsters in the country, had Trump up 1 in the national popular vote, which is deadly for Harris in the Electoral College. Now that poll was pre-debate, right? So you saw that she was on a downward momentum shift. Our model basically kind of predicted that, but you have a new news cycle starting this week. In the post-debate polls, she won by a 2-1 margin in the CNN poll. All the polls I've seen, even the GOP-leaning polls, said that she won the debate. The question is, in a country where you have only 5% of people still undecided, how much does that move the top-line numbers? Even a point would be meaningful. If you go from she was +2 in our national average before the debate. Now, remember, we think that +2 leaves her a little short in the Electoral College, whereas +3, +3.5, +4, now maybe you win the Pennsylvanias and the Arizonas and the Georgias. North Carolina's a state that's in play this year by a point. The last two elections have come down to like less than a point in these key states. It's a little bit nuts that in a country of 350 million people that, 10,000 voters in 3 or 4 states will decide who the next president is. But we've run this movie before and we're probably in the same general territory again.
What are some of the early post-debate polls saying?
You have everything from a Harris +5 in an Ipsos poll to a Trump +2 in a Rasmussen poll. If you're a polling junkie, the Rasmussen polls almost always lean GOP. So, you have to average those out and adjust them carefully. The thing I would warn people about, though, is that it can take a few days. The good high quality pollsters want to go into the field for 3 to 4 days because you're not going to reach everybody on the first try. And because opinions are still forming. 65 million people watched the debate on Tuesday night, which is a lot, high ratings. But 160 million people, more than twice as many, 2.5 times as many, will vote, we think, in November. And they're all going to hear something about it. They might see the memes, or they might read the favorable buzz that Harris got, or see the Taylor Swift endorsement. And so we have to sometimes just acknowledge that polls take some time to do properly. By this weekend, we're taping this on Thursday. By this weekend, you'll have a better idea. By the end of next week, we'll have a really good idea. And then we'll move on to a new news cycle. But I would encourage patience. I mean, it's like slow cooking. Good polling takes a little bit of time.
More bad news for the Democrats. Trump traditionally underperforms in polls. Now, do you factor that into your polling?
Not exactly is a short answer. The model does think that Harris faces more headwinds than tailwinds from this point forward, but more because of the economy and the Electoral College than an estimate of the polling error. What I emphasize is that there can be big polling misses that go in either direction. Some of the key Senate races in 2022, Democrats overperformed their polls, not to a Trump-like degree. But you saw, Senator Fetterman, for example, beat his polling average in Pennsylvania by a couple of points, for instance, and they lost these close races in Georgia consistently, for example. Look, one of the challenges with election forecasting, unlike sports or something, is you're dealing with small sample sizes. We've had 2 elections with Trump on the ballot. In both those elections, he beat his polls by a good, hefty, chunky margin. But it's still a sample size of 2. Yeah. There are complicated factors in each election. In 2020, one issue is that you have COVID, which is, means lockdowns in some parts of the country, and nothing has changed in other, maybe more red, rural parts of the country. So Democrats began responding more to polls during COVID social distancing periods because they're sitting at home, don't have much to do. Republicans are out, cavorting, doing whatever they do, seeing their friends, and might miss the phone call. And so, that might have been an excuse for 2020. The other thing I'd say, though, is in 2020, the poll showed Biden 8 points ahead. Yeah. And I guess it was a pandemic. People were like, well, what's going to happen? But all the polls are saying now is you're going to get an average of 2016 and 2020. And you average those 2 elections and it's a tie, basically. Yeah. So they're making a very reasonable premise here. But that doesn't give you a lot of insight. And, we're not going to wind up on election day, I don't think, with one candidate with an 80-20 lead in the models, right? It's going to be 50-50, 60-40, maybe 2-1. But it's a cliche. It's going to come down to turnout and finding those 4% undecided voters, the last message at the last minute that can shift them in your direction.
I'm a money guy. I always say follow the money. Obviously, you work with Polymarket now. What do you see different in betting line prognostications versus traditional polling?
So one thing is the betting markets can account for new information much more quickly. If you were watching Polymarket or other betting markets on the first debate night in June, they inferred within 15 minutes that Biden was in deep trouble. And you saw Trump's number go up and up until people began to realize that Biden was so bad that he might have to drop out. Right, and that might indirectly hurt Trump because you might have a better Democratic nominee like Harris instead.
So even during the debate, people were getting to that. That's fascinating.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, look, if you look at what investment banks are doing or hedge funds are doing, et cetera, I know some of these people. First of all, everything political risk affects everything now. Different sectors of the economy, or interest rate decisions, or foreign policy toward China and how that affects the semiconductor industry. Political risk affects all of this. And so therefore, I think banks, hedge funds, etc., realize now that they have to have desks that are accounting for political risk. Having prediction markets is one way to trade on that. There are other ways too. I mean, Bitcoin tends to go up when Trump is doing well and down when he's doing poorly. He's seen as more crypto friendly, for example. It seems like maybe the S&P 500 thinks corporate profits are higher under Republicans. Not a terribly radical proposition. Right. But people are making estimates, and in the markets, then making an estimate when everyone else doesn't give you any alpha, any edge. You have to be willing to act on incomplete information.
Let's get to the book, On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything. It's fascinating. Let's first explain the river, and it kind of explains the book.
Yeah, the river is this community of kind of like-minded, analytic, strategic risk takers. That includes Wall Street, it includes Silicon Valley, it includes Las Vegas, although not just like the poker players, but the casino enterprises themselves are getting smarter and smarter about how to get you to gamble more, using analytics for that. But it's people who are both very analytically driven, but also super competitive, right? They want to win. They want to compete. They're very individualistic to the point sometimes of being contrarian and difficult. You see now them getting more involved in politics. Usually poker players used to be like, oh, I don't like politics. I barely even vote. I wish things were more rational, right? I'm staying out of it. Now you see more political engagement from the river, certainly Silicon Valley, some parts of it, not all of it, not even the majority, but you have like a much more vocal Republican contingent in the Peter Thiels and Elon Musk's, maybe Mark Andreessen a little bit, that's shifting against the traditional notion of a blue California. And the clash between the employees at the tech firms, Google's employees donate 95-5 to Democrats over Republicans, and maybe the VCs, some of the founders, some of the people who have made it and are very well off, and may, for selfish or unselfish reasons, be more GOP leaning.
And you talk about, people in this community can go everything from a unsuccessful poker player to a hedge fund billionaire. What are the personality traits of, just kind of describe, obviously there's not one homogenous kind of descriptor, but how do I kind of spot these critters?
It's the willingness to quantify everything, right? If I'm making dinner plans with a friend or something, and I say, there's a 20% chance that I'll get pulled into doing some media hit. I'll be some emergency in the polls I have to write about, right? Otherwise, I'll be happy to have dinner. Just saying it as 20% instead of saying like, oh yeah, you never know. If, it's a busy time of year, I might have to cancel. To sort of quantify and estimate everything. There's a vocabulary that's very common, I think. It's people who welcome conflict, I think, and they tend to thrive when they are under pressure and under stress. They are not risk averse, certainly. Those are, I think, the core attributes. And they do something that I describe in the book as decoupling, which means you're removing the context, the political context from a problem. So for example, if I say, and I have told people, I've disclosed, like, I am going to vote in New York, where it doesn't really matter. I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. I think the January 6th stuff is unacceptable for Trump.
Yeah, that should be a disqualifier for everybody, but go ahead.
We won't get political. But I'm decoupling that from my forecast, right? I can say, I hope Harris wins for the way I'm voting, but she's behind in the polls and she's an underdog, right? And you can say those two things at once instead of having everything fused together where you no longer are able to have an independent opinion because you're tainted or poisoned by politics. So avoiding that, what's called decoupling, is a characteristic of people in that community.
Now, the river is becoming more and more dominant in kind of shaping who we are. Is that going to continue? Because now we've got generations that have grown up on smartphones that are so much more individualistic by nature. They're I'm going to try and say this the right way. Their view of fitting in is not traditionally as much as the generations before. They're built to be solo acts. Is that going to kind of speed this whole thing up?
I think among young people, you actually have a pretty big divide where in some ways, actually, young people are reducing their risk-taking behavior.
Interesting.
So you see less drug consumption, less drinking, for example, among teenagers. You have less sex, actually.
Why is that?
I think it's a couple of things. One is that there's a kind of a culture, maybe more on the left, of safety culture and safetyism, I guess you'd say, which I think was maybe enabled in part by the pandemic. It's also people are moving things online and hanging out less in person. And these things are things you tend to do. You go, whatever, smoke a joint with your friends. Maybe you don't do that as much online, or you can be playing video games or whatnot. But people, I think, are like retreating into online spaces, the younger people are, whereas adults are becoming more risk-taking than ever, right? Things like risky driving are increasing. Things like recreational, marijuana use among adults and other drugs is up a lot. Gambling is increasing a lot. Vegas is setting record revenues. So yeah, all of a sudden, like, the young people are like, oh, let's be careful. And the old people are like, YOLO.
I'm it's curious how you feel about, and this plays into kind of what you do for a living. Betting is more and more kind of part of our culture, obviously, with the tsunami that's happened with legalized sports gambling and the DraftKings and the whatnot. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or just a net neutral?
I mean, the impact of sports betting on society, I think, is probably mildly negative. I mean, there are people who enjoy it. It's a way to, it's not surprising that, like, the leagues have embraced it. It gives you another reason to, like, watch the NFL game, is to track your DraftKings bet or whatever. Yeah, look, I mean, the problem with a lot of things is that for 95% of people, it can be fine. Maybe they don't realize they're losing money, but the house takes 4.5% of every bet. So it's very hard to be a winner in the long run. And by the way, they limit you. They cut your hands off. Not literally. I don't mean to imply any. They stop you from having betting.
It's not the scene from Casino, right? Okay, right.
It's not. No, they're very regulated. However, what they will do is limit how much you're allowed to bet if they think you're a winning player, right? So, like, I can't bet more than $60 on an NBA game on DraftKings, for example.
Are you banned from it? I know you used to be a poker player, professional. Are you banned from any casinos?
Casinos don't mind poker players because with poker, the casino just takes a fee out of every pot, right?
it. Yeah, that was a
Take
dumb
a rake
question.
or charge an hourly fee. So they don't care about poker players. But yeah, look, I mean, they don't want winning players in their casinos. And this is kind of more of the new school mentality. The old school mentality for sports bookmakers used to be that we actually don't mind if a few sharp guys place bets. They'll make money from us, but that gives us information for all the dumb money later on, right? You take a few sharp bets for $5,000 a pop, and then some big celebrities in Las Vegas for a boxing match and bets $1 million or 100,000, and you have a better line now that he's guaranteed to lose at. That old school bookmaking mentality has fallen by the wayside to people who I think are being, I think it's fair to say they're being a little bit greedy in the short run. I mean, I think, the proliferation, you go to Madison Square Garden. I remember when all these sports books first came out in New York, we go to New York Rangers games, and they were like 3 different ads for 3 different betting companies on the sideboards. And I'm like, what is this, right? You wouldn't want like McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's advertising in the same rink. It all canceled each other out, but they had so much capital flowing in that they were so eager to, like, expose the industry. And I think it's look, I bet sports myself. I think it's kind of fun, but I think the inherent size of the industry might not be that large. And there are the 3 to 5% of people who wind up developing serious problems, which are, actually some of the same group. Young to middle-aged men are vulnerable to lots of types of addictive and compulsive behaviors. And, if there's an addictive and compulsive behavior and there's a way to market it to you, then capitalism is going to figure it out for better or for worse.
Let's sell some books. Take me through as far as the way you're laying out the world and laying out the river and kind of dividing things. How is that helping me? What am I learning?
I think partly it's giving you profiles of people that are, for better or worse, moving and shaking the world, right? I mean, tech and finance grow every year as a part of the economy. And the people with this mindset I call the river mindset, Riverian mindset, Elon Musk has this and Jeff Bezos has this and some of the richest people in the world, most of them probably have this very analytical, very competitive skill set, and this kind of immerses you firsthand in their vocabulary and their way of thinking. Now, if you're not in the river, there's this other community I call the village, which is the East Coast establishment, right? It's media and politics and the Ivy League universities. I mean, they're both groups of elites, Donnie. They're both like different halves of the 1%, basically.
Yes.
Look, I think for things like everything from sports betting to crypto to especially AI, we're going to need smart regulation, right? I am an unapologetic fan of the free market, right? I think I trust decentralized mechanisms to make decisions better than central planners. And I think over the course of history, the free market economy and the things that go with it have produced a lot of reduction in poverty, a lot of wealth and lengthening of life and a lot of good things. But, these people's wealth is increasing exponentially. I mean, the top hedge funds are making, probably hedge funds too, but like the top VC firms are returning 20% a year, the top decile firms like Andreessen Horowitz. If you look at the compounding interest on 20% per year, right? I'm happy to get my
money every 3 years,
8% in an index fund, right? But 20% per year compounds really fast. And now Elon Musk is almost like you need a foreign policy toward Elon Musk, right? When Brazil is banning Twitter or threatening to ban Twitter, which I don't support on free speech grounds, but for what it's worth, they need like an ambassador to Elon Musk, almost like he's one of the 50 most powerful countries in the world. And even as someone who likes the free market system, like that worries me. So understanding and meeting them in the middle, I don't want all the risk-taking people on one side and all the neurotic, risk-averse people on the other. I want some type of balance in society.
How did Nate Silver get born? I mean, this character who is just this numbers, kind of like, future betting junkie who brings together this all the things that you're, because you're such a unique character. Where did this all get born?
Probably pretty early. I mean, I was working with, spreadsheets and stuff to try to win my fantasy baseball league when I was 13. Just always been an interest of mine. And I've always been competitive too. I did like debate team in high school. I still speak too fast as a result of in debate team. If the other side didn't have time to respond to your arguments, that was considered a victory, which I think is kind of stupid now looking back on it. So I still talk too fast sometimes because you're trying to say as much as possible in your 8-minute window.
I'm the problem. I have the same thing also. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's this cluster of things because the river is kind of a real place that like people who are interested in poker tend to be interested in markets. They tend to be interested in crypto, a certain way of looking at the world. And so things like AI. So like, it's just kind of the conversations I'm having in real life and the subjects that naturally interest me. Because outside of elections, which I find fascinating, sometimes the political discussion is often kind of tedious and boring. It's fighting about culture war stuff that I think ultimately doesn't have that much impact on people's daily lives. And so the more tech and finance cluster of nerdy topics, and then betting is just, I don't know. I mean, there are some people that get like, I don't think I have like it's fun. It's fun to put your money on the line, I think, right?
Yeah,
if you're used to debating people, it's fun to like actually have a little incentive to be accurate.
It is. What do you, obviously there's so much that goes into all the polling and all the data. And what are the crosstabs that you kind of look at them? Like, what are the things underneath as far as the questions, the issues, the little hints that go, you know what? This is what I really pay attention to.
I think people should be careful actually of delving into the crosstabs too much. And the reason has to do with sample sizes. You might have a poll that has 800 people, which is plus or minus 4%, which is already higher than people might realize, right? Statistically, Harris +3 and Trump +1 can both result from the same poll just based on randomness, for instance. Mm-hmm. When you get into like saying, what do Hispanic women think? Okay, that's a sample size of 40. And the margin of error on that is like 20 points, for instance. So I am more of a fan of looking at the top line numbers, but look, the key divide in American politics for the past 10 years has been between college educated and non-college educated voters, where increasingly the more education you have, the more likely you are to vote Democratic. The problem Democrats have is that a lot of college educated voters are concentrated in New York, New Jersey, California, Seattle, Washington, places like that, not places that are swing states, Boston, Massachusetts, not places that are swing states. So they're wasting votes potentially. So if Harris consolidates those college educated voters who are worried about Biden, but is not selling with non-college voters, then that's where you can have that electoral college popular vote split working in Trump's favor potentially.
Well, a little outside the line question. One thing I always worry, when you brought it up when you talk about sample size, it's changed obviously with streaming, but traditionally TV ratings, they're basing on like 3 people. Like they're basically, if you want to know what people are watching a show who earned over $75,000 plus a year, it's based on 3 people that have boxers. I mean, how have they over the years gotten away with the ridiculous sampling and coming up with these numbers that billions ride on?
So this is kind of classic statistics, central limit theorem, and law of large numbers. I mean, it is amazing that you actually can get a pretty good estimate based on 500 people in a poll, 1,000 people in a poll, if, and this is important, if the sample is unbiased, because often it isn't, right? If certain types of people are more likely to have TV boxes, or certain types of people are more likely to respond to polls, which they are. People who are more enthusiastic about politics are more likely to respond to surveys. If you're using landlines, then old people respond more than young people. So you have to make adjustments for that. But
what's
I know, right? I mean, I don't have a landline. You know, I barely answer. I just text with people, and then if there's some emergency, if someone's calling, it's like either a media hit or like an emergency, right?
Right.
So so that's a challenge for pollsters.
Nate, the book is On the Edge, The Art of Risk Taking. It is a must read for anybody who wants to know where the fucking world is going. Because you kind of, it's, and keep up all the good work, and fingers crossed that the good guys are going to win. As far as my view, the good guys are the blue guys. And I will be watching you. By the way, I post every day. I Google latest Harris-Trump polls. I'm like, it's like SportsCenter. You can't get enough of it.
First thing I wake up pretty much before coffee. All right, thanks, Donny. Talk to you soon.
Once again, the book is On the Edge, The Art of Risking Everything. Go read it. I highly recommend it. Thank you, my friend. Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.